everybody, this is Sarahscopic and you're watching Traffic Musings. Today I'm going to talk about the fact that I used to be a closet nerd or geek or whatever. I don't know, okay, the difference between those words, there is like sort of a difference, but obviously it can get kind of weird to describe. I'm going to be using the word nerd for what I'm describing here, but you could use the word geek. Geek just means anyone, technically by dictionary definition, just means anyone who is very obsessed over something. So that's why, you have geeks of, video games, but you could also have a sports geek or a history geek, all that kind of stuff. Nerd seems to be its own kind of title, full of interests and also some kind of, some definitions say it includes like, some kind of issues like with socializing. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't use the word nerd. I'm gonna use the word geek. I don't know. It's so funny because I found that people really have a problem like with one of those two words. I used to be heavily involved in kind of the geek or nerd club, as I lovingly call it, at my undergrad. And I remember I used to be in charge of advertising, and I used, I think, the word geek on something or nerd on something, and I was in, people were on two different camps on it. Some people thought it was don't use that word, it's a really bad word, and other people were saying, no, that's the word we're going to use and such, and it was really weird. And everyone's got a different opinion, which sounds worse, and it's totally just depends on the person. There's no consistency with it. So I don't know. I've used both words just as lovingly and used to describe myself, but I can't really tell you which is what. So I don't know. You tell me in the comments below. Do you say that you're a nerd or that you're a geek or a geek of certain things? You tell me. I'm interested to know because this is a kind of a weird debate. We have this book at home that's like, what's the difference between, it's actually a really interesting book. It's one of those books we leave in our bathroom for guests, just in case. And it's really interesting because it, tells you the difference between very popular terms and such that you never even really would think of. And on there is nerd versus geek. And that's usually, those are the definitions I always think of when I think of nerd and geek. And so that's why I mentioned geek, and according to that and, other dictionary definitions is, being obsessed with something, while nerd has its own culture, you know what I mean? And it has its own set of characteristics, sometimes, sometimes framed by, issues with socializing, I don't know. So it's weird. It's a weird thing. So you tell me. I'm interested to know about the difference then. But that's not exactly what I was going to talk about. So, as I mentioned, I was kind of a closet nerd or a closet geek, whatever nerd word. I'm going to use the words interchangeably in this case. But when I was younger, I had a lot of nerdy interests, mostly because of where I grew up. I think I've told you guys before, but in case you don't know, I've been playing tabletop, as in D&D and those kinds of things, Dungeons and Dragons, for quite a long time. I don't do it as much as I would like to, but I did it before I really got into video games even. I started around when I was 10 years old and did it very consistently up until pretty much the last couple of years, to be honest. Basically, my brother, we were up north one year at the cabin, and my brother found, a kit for D&D 3.0, and my mom and my cousin were there, and we thought it might be kind of a fun family activity, so we gave it a try. My brother had a lot of fun doing it, and so he got all the official core rule books, and for a while it was just my mom and I. We each had 2 characters. And then my brother started inviting more and more people. My mother had to phase out because she was really busy with things, and so that's how it kind of got started. That's why I got a lot of weird stories. And but yeah, it was a very big part of my life though for a long time. For my childhood, I would say, it was not early childhood, but like I said, it was 10 and up, through middle school and such. It was a very important part. Other kinds of things fantasy and stuff like that, it's kind of embarrassing. I never finished the Harry Potter books, mostly because I got really annoyed with Harry by book 6 and book 5, and so I kind of lost interest because I thought he was just being too stupid. I was kind of young at the time. I want to reread them now because they were an integral part of my childhood. I feel weird saying that because I never finished them, but they were. We were one of those families that my mother would read the books to us, and so it was a real big deal, and such like that. And so it feels, I technically, I think for all intents and purposes could call myself a Harry Potter fan, but I don't feel like a true true fan because I haven't finished them. And honestly, for right now, it's just because of lack of time, not because of lack of interest. Now I think I would appreciate them more, even though I probably would still think Harry was kind of a silly butt, but at least I could have probably appreciated it a little bit better than when I was a little bit younger. So I don't know. I should read them and finish them, but there's a lot of things I should do that I shouldn't be doing. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, nerd stuff. Why is that guy walking in the middle of the highway? Okay, there was a guy, he wasn't walking in the middle of the highway, but like, you know how there's the exit and then there's the rest of the highway, and so there's a little stretch where, you know, no cars are supposed to go in between. He was walking through that. I don't know what he was expecting he would be able to do, where he was going to go, but whatever. Okay, that was kind of weird. Traffic musing for the day. Moving on. So fantasy stuff was always a big part of me when I was younger, and just, you know, the other kind of imagination such, but like I said, I didn't play video games like super much, but I did play video games when I was younger, and especially like D&D was something that was pretty big when I was younger. But of course, you know, especially during my time, those kinds of interests were still seen as kind of geeky and not really well, you know, supported at that time. Now, of course, it doesn't matter, but back then there was still kind of issue where it was kind of awkward. And so our family didn't really talk about it much with other people, just because also, as I'm about to say, there's the stigma against D&D was still kind of there. It was starting to go away, especially by the early 2000s. The stigma that was attached to in the early 80s and 90s was finally starting to wear off, but people were still kind of concerned about it, and so we just didn't talk about it. And especially when I was in middle school, which of course is the age that everything is awkward and embarrassing and you worry about everything that you do, I said nothing about the fact that I did D&D. Nothing, especially since the friends I had at the time would have not, I don't know how they would have felt about it, but I was legitimately concerned that they would think I was a weirdo. Like, I was really concerned that they would all of a sudden not want to talk to me and such like that. And of course, looking back, it's like, well, if they were really your friends, you know, that they should have been fine with it. But that's easy to say now, you know, from a point where you're separated from the whole thing, than back then where everything is flying at you, all the emotions and all the concerns are flying at you. So I don't think I would have done it any differently, but it was just a difficult thing, and I just didn't say anything. The biggest like release for me was when in high school I finally, like early on, like freshman year, found a couple of friends who were accepting of it, or at the very least, like, they didn't think it was necessary, they didn't think less of me for it. So they didn't really know much about it, but they didn't think less of me for it because they thought, they're like, oh, that's yeah, some people do that, that's cool that you do. And so there was no embarrassment associated with it. And so I was finally kind of more willing to come out with it. And then finally it was like junior and senior year, I couldn't care less what people thought. And so I would openly admit, like, yeah, I do that, you know, I play this, you know, I play this game with my brother's friends every Saturday or every other Saturday. It's just what we do. And it became a little easier to kind of come out with it. And it also, when it came to like fantasy stuff and things like that, when I was in elementary school, people knew I was into fantasy stuff. It was very obvious. Mostly you could tell by the books I liked to read. Most of kids my age, you know, besides Harry Potter was acceptable, especially like around middle school. Harry Potter was like the acceptable fantasy, and I guess Chronicles of Narnia were too, which I didn't really read. But I read a lot of weird fantasy stories that like nobody knows and nobody really cares for, and so I had no real way of expressing my favorites with those, and so I had no way of really relating to people on that level. And so people, you know, it's like, oh, what's your favorite genre? Oh, fantasy. Oh, you know, do you read Harry Potter? Yeah, but those aren't my favorite. I like these books. What are those? That's kind of what happened a lot. And so it was just kind of funny that way. It also was very apparent when I would write stories in elementary school, because, of course, when I heard the word fiction, I always went to fantasy. I kind of forgot that fiction could mean like real life, but it just never happened. To me, fiction meant more than just it never happened. It meant more like it could never happen. And so very much when I thought of fiction, I thought of fantasy. And so when we were assigned to write a fictional story in elementary school, they were always fantasy stories for me, because that's what I knew and that's what I thought was great. And so it's just kind of funny how that ended up working out like that. And it was kind of both embarrassing, but also kind of what made me stick out in elementary school, because most people didn't write straight up fantasy, but that's what I wrote. And so it was kind of embarrassing because I was the only one whose imagination would go in that direction, and so that was kind of weird. But it was also kind of cool because people like recognized that's kind of what made me stand out a little bit as a kid. And so that's what kind of people knew me for, was like the fantasy obsessed person. So one memory that I have about this whole thing with fantasy and me being known for it that sticks out to mind for whatever reason was, so as elementary school kids, you go to the library all the time, and we used to have, like I said, time we go to the library, and there's a thing you could do for the library where you could read your favorite story in front of the class. That was just something that they did if you felt like it. And so I got super excited and I wanted to do that. And the story I ended up picking was actually a book my brother had that I liked a lot. It was a story about like a princess and her befriending a unicorn and a dragon. Very fantasy, right? You know, like perfectly fantasy. And so I read that in front of the class, and I didn't really think anything much of it, but for some reason a lot of my classmates super remembered that. Like even like a year later they remembered me telling the story. I'm not really sure why. I guess it's because I was the only one who like did like a pure fantasy story, but I don't know. It was just kind of a funny thing for people to like always remember me for, like, oh yeah, you read The Unicorn and the Dragon. I think that was the name of the story. Or is Dragon and the Unicorn? Dragon and the Unicorn, I think that's what it was called. I don't know. My mother can correct me. But it's just funny how that ended up working out. So I don't know. But yeah, I was seen as the fantasy lover. I was seen, but I was also kind of a closet geek and nerd and didn't really tell people and was quiet about it, especially since also back then in middle school. People were already making fun of me because I was smart. I wasn't going to give them any more things to leverage me over. Although I will say, I mentioned before how like at the end of high school, I stopped caring. Here's how I know I stopped caring. There's a shirt that I got when I was younger that was just a purple shirt with a unicorn on it. And it wasn't a cartoony unicorn. It was very, like, fantasy. So it wasn't even just like, oh, that's cute. It was very much like, oh, you're a geek who likes unicorns. Like, it was like that pretty background. And when I was younger, I did not feel comfortable wearing it to school. I was afraid people were going to make fun of me because I was wearing a shirt with a unicorn on it to school. It sounds kind of silly in hindsight. That is one of those things I think probably I wouldn't have been made as much fun of over. Maybe in middle school because everyone was wearing, like, you know, regular, like, weird clothes in middle school. But in high school, like, it shouldn't have mattered. But I didn't, because I was really concerned about how, you know, I was worried about people making fun of me, and I just didn't want to deal with it. And I left this shirt in my, you know, clothes drawer for ages because I liked the shirt. I would wear it during breaks and stuff when, you know, I was just with family. I just wouldn't wear it to school. And one day when I was in high school, when I was older, I kind of was trying to rummage through and figure what I wanted to wear that day. And I looked at the unicorn shirt and I was like, oh, I'll wear this today. And I thought about it and I went, I have never worn this shirt to school before. Why am I suddenly comfortable with this? And I had to kind of think about it for myself, just like what happened, you know, something different occurred. And, you know, that's kind of the power of, you know, positive peer relationships and having friends who don't care or do agree that what you wear is fine. So yeah, be supportive, people. That's all I can say. Anyway, this is running kind of over time, so we're just gonna end this here. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope something amazing happens to you. Without further ado, I hope to see you all in the next episode. Bye-bye!